2 weeks ago, we stood out right in front of this department, just to my right there, to recommit ourselves to our community. We stood in front of this department in solidarity against a tragedy that occurred at the hands of a police officer in Minnesota. We stood out against police brutality. And we did that because we recognize that it's critically important that the trust of our community is intact, that our community knows that they can trust their police department, that they know that we're part of this community, and that we're here to help them, to serve them, and not to hurt them. Unfortunately, today I stand before you to tell you that one of our own has violated that trust. The officer's name is Officer Jason Santiago. He's an 8-year veteran of the force, and he's assigned to the Fairhaven District. The incident in question occurred in the month of December on Christmas morning, when Officer Santiago and other officers responded to a call on Lombard Street involving an individual that was intoxicated. During the course of their investigation, a struggle ensued with this individual as they attempted to put him in handcuffs and place him under arrest. At one point, they were able to get him subdued. He was on the ground. He was handcuffed. He was no longer a threat. And Officer Santiago engaged in behavior that an investigation has determined, and our evaluation has determined, constitutes excessive force. As such, I have placed Officer Santiago on administrative leave, paid administrative leave, and he is going to go before the Board of Commissioners next Tuesday, where I will recommend that the commissioners terminate Officer Santiago for his actions. He was found in violation of department general orders regarding de-escalation and use of force, and the department's rules regarding general rules of conduct. We are releasing the video of that incident, that you will have that momentarily, and we have also released the internal affairs report per FOI laws. As I said, Officer Santiago will be presented in front of the Police Commission, where his fate will be decided by that board. In addition to Officer Santiago, another officer was on scene and involved. He was found to be in violation of departmental rules and regulations as well, separate from Officer Santiago. I want to be clear that this officer was not an accomplice to Officer Santiago. He had no opportunity to stop Officer Santiago from what he did, and he was not complicit in the actions that Officer Santiago took. Nonetheless, he was in violation of 3 department policies and procedures, for which he was also disciplined and given 15-day suspension, which is the maximum I can give him. That is all that I'm going to share now with regard to the investigation, but I just want to end by saying this. This action is reprehensible, and it is critically important that as police leadership and also as police officers, we not only talk about wanting trust, and not only talk about the fact that we will stand out against police brutality, that if there's an opportunity for us to stop it, that we do, and more importantly, if it happens, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And that's what we're doing here today. It is a sad day for the department, but I can assure you of this. This is not emblematic. It does not represent the best of this department. We have outstanding men and women that go out there every single day and do their job, especially under the most difficult of circumstances, especially under current circumstances. And so what I would say is that the character of this department is strong. This doesn't represent the character of the men and women of this department. And we will continue to hold ourselves to the highest standards that we have come to expect from ourselves and that the community demands. So with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Chief, can you talk about why the department didn't know from December until March about exactly what transpired?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, based on the investigation, it was just not something that was brought that we knew about. Just another case, if you will. A supervisor wasn't on scene. The individual was arrested. More importantly, the individual never made an arrest. The subject's name is Mr. Luis Rivera. He was arrested himself for assaulting a police officer. He was arrested himself for other charges, and he's also being, his case is being adjudicated at the court level. We learned about this during one of the court proceedings. The assistant state's attorney was approached by the defense attorney with video evidence of that incident. Upon looking at that, she contacted me and contacted her boss, State's Attorney Griffin, to bring it to our attention, and we immediately started. That was March 9th, and I initiated an internal affairs investigation March 10th as soon as I found out about it. As you know, COVID started March 11th, and soon thereafter we were hot and heavy dealing with a health crisis, which definitely played into why it took us from March to now to render a decision on this. Nonetheless, it's a priority for this department. I can assure you it was nothing, we did not intentionally delay it. And once we were able to get COVID under control, we began to make sure that the things that were critical for us to pay attention to, such as this, we were doing so, and we completed this investigation. I want to thank the Internal Affairs team for their diligent work and their dedication to making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. They did a just and proper investigation, a complete investigation, and I was able to render a decision based on that. Another thing worth noting is that the state's attorney's office decided that they were going to conduct an independent investigation and entertain criminal charges against Officer Santiago. They have not yet concluded whether or not they're going to arrest Officer Santiago or present him with charges. Irrespective of that, it was important for me as the chief in this department to take action. I couldn't delay that any further. I do anticipate that they will render a decision on that in the very near future. Yeah, that's a good question. And, as I said, what happened with Officer Santiago happened very sudden. When you look at the video, you'll see that it's actually very difficult to even see it. It was until you look at the body camera. The other officers didn't even realize that he had kicked the individual, right? And so, based on the investigation, we were able to, and we looked at that. We were able to determine that they were not in a position to know exactly what transpired, and so therefore, we found them not to be culpable of any sort of alignment or failure to act sort of policies. So he turned off his body camera towards the initial part of the investigation prior to this incident happened. As a matter of fact, the body camera footage that we have about what happened with Officer Santiago is from this other officer's body camera. So it was working during their struggle with the individual, and it did capture the acts of Officer Santiago. Officer Santiago did have his body camera.
Chief, how does the current political moment, the mass uprisings in the streets across the country against police brutality, influence the way you see this incident locally and the way that you recommended discipline of Officer Santiago?
Listen, that's a great question, and I think it's in the minds of everyone. Certainly it's in the mind of officers. It's in the mind of all of us. Listen, we carry the burden of what's going on in the country. We own that as officers. Every single day what we do, we recognize that what we do here and what other officers do elsewhere around the nation impacts us every single day. It's the image of the badge, it's the image of the uniform, and we own that every single time we go out there. So while I will tell you that irrespective of what happened in Minnesota, what Officer Santiago did was unacceptable. And I would have put him in front of the board no matter what. But I can tell you that it's further exacerbated by the fact that right now, the trust of policing hangs in the balance. The community trust, the community respect is in the balance because of these types of behaviors. Now, while this incident does not even equate to Minnesota, obviously the temperature, the tone, and the pain that everybody is feeling right now, right, is, is someone supported when officers engage in behavior that's excessive, right? People are saying we need to be above the law. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. People are calling for that. And while people are not going to equate this to, obviously, what happened to George Floyd, it's not even in that category. But it is in the category of trust, of abandonment of trust, and it is in the category of excessive force.
Chief, this incident began with a call about an intoxicated man, and the dispute began, from what I understand, over whether or not a car should be towed. There's a lot of talk right now about what the appropriate role of a police officer is in this country in enforcing and maintaining public safety. Do you think that this call is this an appropriate event for police officers to respond to as we as a country think about what officers should be doing and what they shouldn't be?
Well, what I will say is that those officers were there to address a potential violation of the law. And so, in that regard, yes. In terms of the broader conversation about what the footprint of policing should be and what we should be investigating or not investigating, what I will say, I will defer to the community about that. The policing started as representatives of the community, right? And so I will respect the community's authority and right to decide what policing should look like in their particular jurisdictions. But what I will say is that the officers were there to carry out a lawful investigation for what was alleged to be a violation of the law. And so at this point, yes, the officers should be there. What that looks like in the future, that's up for debate. But certainly the officers, the question I would ask when I look at that incident, and one of the things that we pride ourselves in is our ability to de-escalate situations. One of the things that we will be doing is just learning from this incident, looking at it, and obviously we have work to do, right? Because what I would have liked to have seen in that incident was a situation where officers de-escalated that, right, and it didn't turn into what it did. Do we have room for improvement? You'll be the judge when you see that interview. When you see that video. From my vantage point, there was a lot to learn from that video. Absolutely a lot to learn from that video, and we will. I think it's the former. I think honestly, it's the culture. It's changing. We have made ourselves more accessible. Internal affairs investigations now can be done. The reporting can be done online. We do house calls. We work on the weekends. We will do anything possible to make it conducive for people to hold us accountable and to feel comfortable in making a report against police. That has increased in the last few years. We're dedicated. We put sound investigators. We put our best people in the IA. Why? Not because we want to get cops in trouble, but because we want to hold ourselves accountable and because we want to make sure the community trusts us. So when someone makes a complaint, what I would say from that rise is that people feel more confident. They feel like they can make a complaint. And so I would look at that as sort of a badge of honor to say the department is more transparent, more accessible, and people feel the confidence that they can make a complaint to the police department. Sure. So all of our internal affairs reporting is online. We update it monthly, and we report it out every month with the Board of Police Commissioners. So I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but I would encourage you to go to our website. All of that information is online, and you would be able to see the trends over the past few years as well.
Chief, New Haven Police has been fighting for years to get the staffing up, and it's getting a little closer, and now we've run into this issue nationwide. And there's been a call, as Tom has said and others, for defunding police, and in some cases abolishing police. If there's a recommendation for you for policing nationwide, is it not defunding but spending more money so that we can train more, so that everybody's on the same page, and having perhaps a unified nationwide policy on standards and practices?
Yeah, you know, the issue of defunding the police is not new, and it's definitely controversial. But I would say this, and it goes back to what I said to Tom. I mean, at the end of the day, the community gets to choose what type of police department it wants, right? But what I would say is that we need to understand what the needs are of the community, and we need to make sure that the decisions we make are responsible and that we're not inadvertently hurting the community with the decisions we make. And I would submit to you, in this current climate right now, we need police officers. This community has relationships, strong relationships with its police officers. And right now, I'm going to have Assistant Chief Jacobson report on a rash of robberies that we had yesterday. You know, we still are dealing with violence in our street. We still have too many homicides, too many shootings in our streets. And while we've done a tremendous job, I think, not just as a police department, but as a community, of bringing those numbers down, the fact is there's a lot of work to do. I hope that we can someday have a legitimate conversation that we no longer need the police. Are we there now? No, we're not. We need to augment the force. We need to support officers in the work that they're doing, and we need to continue putting the pressure where it needs to be. Officers are doing the work in society that others need to do. Officers have become everything to everyone now. And we need to start thinking about what is the footprint of officers in our society? What should it be? But right now, based on what it is and what the current standard is, certainly in New Haven, of community policing, of police engagement, of us being completely immersed in our communities, we don't need less police officers. We need more to satisfy that demand. And so I would defer to the community on that, but I would also say we need to implement mechanisms so that the community can be safer and can be ready to have a conversation like that.
What's his record on the force? Is there any kind of disciplinary action against him previously? Or any of the officers on the team?
No. You know, without trivializing what he did, Officer Santiago was a tremendous officer by all accounts. Came from an urban neighborhood, you know, overcame a lot, and was an outstanding officer. As a matter of fact, just earlier this week, he saved someone from a burning car, an individual who had a shotgun. He used tremendous tactics and handled that situation and was able to pull that individual out and save him from getting burned in a burning car.
How do you square that with the officer that you then saw a body cam footage?
I square that in that we're human beings, right? And that human beings are not infallible. But when they make mistakes and when they wear a badge, those mistakes have to be taken very seriously. But it doesn't take away from the fact that he's a human being, and that he's a good man, and that he's a good officer. But we have to separate both of those. I'm not condemning Officer Santiago. I'm condemning Officer Santiago's actions. They weren't acceptable. They can't be condoned. And because of that, he's going to face some stiff consequences. But this is not a condemnation on Officer Santiago.
Have you spoken to him? Has he,
We absolutely did have a conversation with him.
can you share any kind of reaction that he had?
I can tell you it was one of the longest disciplinary hearings I've been a part of. It was emotional, and out of respect to him, I won't share anything more, but these are not difficult things to do, right? These are not difficult things to do, because oftentimes when we think about officers and when we think about police, you know, we sort of don't want to attribute a personality, an individual, a human being to that badge. But the fact is that the people wearing these uniforms and badges are human beings, okay? And they go out there and they have to deal with some very difficult circumstances. And unfortunately, especially in this climate, they have to be on their game and they have to be perfect. They can't make a mistake. But this wasn't a mistake. This was a wrong act. This was something that's contrary to our values, and it's contrary to the character of this department. That's what he's facing. And make no bones about it, I'm sure he regrets that. But nonetheless, you know, as we all know from being children, right? Consequences, we must face our consequences, and his consequences are dire. But not just to him, to this department, to every person that wears a uniform. But just to go back and circle back, they're human beings. And at the end of the day, we can't forget that. they do make mistakes.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, I'm going to just give you an update on the robberies.